Hello and welcome to Strategic Compass. Today we are joined by Professor Fyodor Lukyanov of Valdai Discussion Forum, Research Director and Professor of Moscow Economics University. Professor Lukyanov, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you. Bye. Hello.
Well, it's our pleasure. And as you can imagine, we are going to be talking about Russia's, we are going to be covering the Ukrainian war and particularly the Russian perspectives. Professor Lukyanov is, well known on the subject. And, let me just do the little introduction about what we hear about what's going on the Ukrainian war and the Russian perspectives in particular. There is again lots of coming and going. There is, all the negotiations starting in Istanbul. Sometimes there would be this statement by the two sides and the European countries, trying to basically sabotage the peace process in one way or the other. Istanbul has been designated as the place where the negotiations would go on again. And on the question of the Russian perspectives, now we understand that Russia doesn't want a ceasefire just for the sake of the ceasefire. Russia seems to want a ceasefire as part of a general peace agreement. Would you like to comment on that first, and then we'll carry on with the talk?
Yeah, we hope that next round of talks will be held in Istanbul soon. There is an expected exchange of so-called memoranda with visions on both sides, how this roadmap to the end of the war can look like. To be frank and realistic, we don't expect any kind of compatible views from those two documents. It looks, and we know more or less that the Russian position will be very clear, and basically Russia will repeat all those demands and all those requirements which have been announced several times, most recently actually during the first round of negotiations. And those demands are seen in Ukraine and in the West, including even partially in the United States, in the Trump team, as maximalist and excessive, too harsh. So, you said that I'm familiar with this issue. I'd love to, but
well, all of us as academics,
Unfortunately, this is a very, very specific process, and I would say that we are back to diplomacy as we knew it from textbooks about 18th or 19th century, when there is a real high stakes diplomacy between kings, sultans, prime ministers, so on the level of number ones. And here I think we can expect, and we see it already, a game of nerves, game of intellects between actually two persons, Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump. So I say it because in this kind of diplomacy, we should take into account that decisions can be made very spontaneously based on personal feelings. Coming back to your question about ceasefire, if we look at really big conflicts in history in the past, not wars like Americans conducted in 1990s or 2000, those big invasions, regime changes, but real wars, big wars of serious opponents. Frankly, I don't remember situations when ceasefire would preclude real diplomatic talks. For the better or for the worse, military activities, military force is one of the most important arguments in any diplomatic and political process. That's fact of life. That's how it works. That's why I really think that Russia and Putin mean it when our diplomats say that ceasefire should be a result of negotiations which would create at least contours of the final agreement, not the precondition for such negotiations. Mm-hmm. And again, another thing which we know from Russian history, and including history with the Turkish participation in the 19th century, for example, Russian diplomats always tried to defend what Russian military forces achieved. And normally in history, Russia had to step back in diplomatic talks compared to what military forces achieved before. So that means that Russian military forces and Russian political leadership will try to achieve as much as possible by military means before it will be some kind of compromise solution in the diplomatic negotiations.
Well, in terms of the compromise now, the leak to the press by high-ranking American officials, people like Kellogg and Witkoff, who have spoken to President Putin, and the high-ranking Russian officials, there is this understanding of the American side about Russia's demand that Ukraine should be turned into a neutral state, and NATO should guarantee that it is not going to expand eastward. That also includes Moldova, Georgia, and certainly Ukraine. Do you think these are the things that the others consider maximalist, particularly the Europeans and the others? Or do you agree with these leaks to the press? From the Russian point of view, when Russia basically launched the war in 2022, these were also the demands right on the table.
Yeah, that's a very important issue, and thank you for asking. First of all, we start with this maximalist. No, I don't think that this particular part of negotiations is seen by Americans as maximalist. More than that, General Kellogg, who is the least Russia-friendly person in Trump's entourage, said that we understand that Russians feel unsecure because of expansion of NATO, and we are ready to stop it. That was his statement. And by the way, this is a revolution, because for decades, when Russia said about concerns in the context of NATO enlargement, reaction was, "Oh, come on, forget about it. That's not true," and that's it. So this is
open door policy, blah blah.
Open door policy. That's not your business. We decide with the countries who want to join, and at the end there is zero threat to Russia. Okay, now finally it's accepted. But I think it's quite clear what Kellogg said is actually obvious, that several countries in NATO, they will not allow Ukraine to join, including the United States. And in this regard, this issue is not off the table, but it's not the most vital one. Same with Moldova, same with Georgia. By the way, Georgia and Moldova, that was said by Kellogg, not by Russians. So of course we will not discuss with Ukraine whether Georgia and Moldova will join or not. When it comes to maximalism, I think another part of this package is being mentioned all the time, which is really a very serious problem. This is firstly a Russian demand, which has been repeated several times, including by President Putin, that Ukraine should withdraw from territories which Russia have not under its control, not taken by military force. This is like Kherson region, from which Russia withdrew in fall 22, and the Zaporozhye, where Russia never was present by military force. And those territories, those 4 regions formerly of Ukraine, they were included in Russian constitution, changes in constitution in September 22. And so now this is something. This is a demand which, at least so far, is there on the table from the Russian side. And of course, to be frank, that's a very maximalist demand. So when you ask for territories which you don't control, so it means that the opposite side, if it would withdraw from those territories, that would mean a total capitulation, actually. This total military give up. Second issue, which might be seen as maximalist, despite the fact that it has been discussed in Istanbul 3 years ago, that's demilitarization of Ukraine. In other words, limitations on Ukrainian military potential. At that point, in April 22, Ukraine was ready to at least to discuss it. And we know from the protocols prepared that they discussed concrete particular figures about the military capacity. Now they don't want to discuss it. And of course, the level of Western involvement in the issue is unprecedented. And the whole security and military part is completely different than at that time. But still, this is the very important requirement from the Russian side. And I think personally that's pure speculation from my side. The territorial issue about those 4 regions, it might be negotiable in case other issues will be settled. The demilitarization stuff, not. That will be a very firm demand from the Russian side. So at the end of the day, we have a very complex package, which includes actually all those goals set by Putin from the very first moment when the war started, and even before, when this issue started to be discussed in late 21. It's important to understand for our audience, because I guess that there are some misreadings in the Western interpretation of Russia. Putin's position on why he started this campaign and what should be achieved has never changed. Never. Despite the fact that situation on the ground was very, very different at different points. And it was a period when situation on the ground was pretty bad for Russia. We remember that the second half of 22 was miserable. But at that time and later and now, the contour of what Russia wants to achieve is absolutely the same. And when I hear, and you ask me about compromises, and when I hear a lot of discussions about that, what compromises Russia and Putin will do in order to stop this war. I think the misreading is it's not on the agenda to stop the war. I mean, it's not the goal to stop the war. The goal is to achieve certain political and military gains, which would, as Putin usually says, which would eliminate the roots of this problem. It's not about how to find an exit strategy, which Americans did in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Libya, wherever. That's about achieve a very important result, very important from Putin's point of view, existentially important. And that's not the case, as some people in the West believe, that Putin and Russian leadership dream how to stop it, how to disengage, how to go to the next phase. It's not the case. The case is still now to achieve goals which have been formulated initially.
Well, on the question of demilitarization of Ukraine, that is an utmost, as you put it. So it is even perhaps more important than the territorial acquisition for Russia, because when it comes to the Western fear that is being, propagated all the time, particularly among the Europeans, that if Russia overwhelms Ukraine, then begin to learn Russian because they are going to be coming all the way around and they are going to be invading and occupying the whole of Europe. The whole of Europe is going to be under Russian control and blah, blah. I mean, Russia has the largest territories in the world. A comparison would say, for instance, Turkey is territorially the largest country in Europe, excluding Russia. And Russia's territorial size is 20 times that of Turkey. So Russia doesn't need territory and all that. So the territorial side may be open to some negotiations to arrive at a compromise. But, there has been so much conflict that has gone on. So it may not be so easy to make a compromise on it either. But on the question of denazification, I think from the right beginning, I think Putin and his high-ranking officials kept talking about denazification. What do they mean by that? And, and how would you achieve it? For instance, in terms of demilitarization, you can put certain figures and limits on the Ukrainian military, and, there would be monitoring committees and certain military forces, monitoring all that in time of peace. But what about the denazification?
Yeah, denazification was a notion which not everybody in Russia could understand from the beginning. I think by the way, the usage of this formula has been decreased after initial launch. I wouldn't say it was the most fortunate formula for describing the goals. To put it in a more usual terms, that was actually the favorite American notion of regime change. Regime change it did mean, and it does mean Zelensky personally. Of course, many people in Russia expect Zelensky to leave the position after the war is over, because most likely he will not be able to govern. But that's another issue. Regime change in terms of foundations for the contemporary Ukrainian statehood, which from Russian point of view, and I think this point of view has a lot of rationale, is based on the very clear anti-Russian sentiment. In practical terms, it means, and we see it now, that the current Ukrainian rule, they try to eliminate as much of Russianness as possible. Russian language, Russian literature, usage of when people listen to Russian music and so on. that is severe during this conflict, of course, during the war, but it began earlier. And one of the reasons why Putin took this decision was that this process of de-Russification, actually, of Ukraine was very advanced, despite the fact that Zelensky himself, his native language is Russian. He has never been anything like a Ukrainian nationalist, but that's a paradox, irony of politics and history.
He also won the elections in 2019 on a peace ticket, didn't he? You know, he also got large votes from the Russian-speaking side, from the eastern parts of Ukraine, certainly in the second,
Absolutely, he was. He brought a big hope that the whole Donbas stuff, which was very tiresome to all Ukrainians, would end. But yeah, different, very strange things happen in history. Anyway, now when the future constellation is being discussed, Foreign Minister Lavrov mentioned several times in recent days that we cannot allow any Ukrainian regime after Zelensky to continue this kind of anti-Russian policies. You might ask how it can be achieved in case Ukraine survives as a state, maybe with some losses, but it will survive and remain with Western support. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure that it's possible to impose some political identity on the country which does exist. So I'm not very optimistic about that. But at least so far, that it might be part of agreement, at least rhetorically. I think for Russia it will be important at least to hear from the Ukrainian side that they will consider how to change. They will never do it. I think everybody knows. But at least to note that this is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's turn to the negotiations. You know, you said there are two leaders who are actually involved in the negotiations on the Russian side, Putin and Trump. So the two can reach an agreement, you know, as you said, simultaneously, almost overnight, or it can go on like this. Now, on the question of achieving a breakthrough, what are the hurdles now? For instance, are the Europeans the real hurdles? For instance, the three countries of Europe in particular seem to be doing whatever they can to disrupt the negotiations in any way possible, you know, Britain, France, and Germany. And also, I'll also ask you about the latest German government's supply of Taurus missiles to Ukraine, with the authority that they can use them against targets well deep inside Russia. And the Russian officials replying that it would be a dangerous thing because they would then respond by hitting Berlin.
First, the last part. We had a lot of grievances vis-a-vis former German Chancellor Scholz. But to be fair, Mr. Scholz was very clear about red lines, what Germany would do and what Germany wouldn't do and will never do. Mm-hmm. And he was, in this regard, he was pretty clear and pretty consistent. He said from the beginning, no Taurus missiles to Ukraine, never, and it never happened. So it was some kind of integrity in his position. In case of Mr. Merz, frankly, I don't understand what does he mean. It seems that he decided to adopt a very special approach, which we know from his colleague and friend, Mr. Macron. Because Macron creates strategic ambiguity by saying anything chaotically. He says very harsh things. Immediately he says that no, but we need to include Russia, and so on, all the time. So it seems that Merz government will rather operate in this way. Frankly, I guess, I don't know. Of course, we are far away from Germany now, and most of contacts have been destroyed, mostly from their side. But I don't believe that Merz will really do what he says about Taurus missiles. It's rather an attempt to demonstrate leadership, as those big European countries want to do. As for the bigger question, whether Europe and European powers are biggest hurdles for the peace process, yes and no. Yes, because you're right, they do everything to undermine this process and to derail this process. And they will continue doing that. No, because they don't have a lot of influence, actually. Look what happened starting from early May. European countries, the four leaders came to Kiev May the 10th and issued an ultimatum to Putin: stop fighting, and otherwise that will be end of everything. We will. Nothing happened. The ultimatum was totally ignored. And then all steps by Europeans, they seem to be not serious. They seem to be happening only to say something. Neither US nor Russia nor Ukraine. That's the most important thing. They listen to that. Ukraine appeals. Ukraine refers to European powers all the time. Of course, that's their their firmest allies in wars. But my feeling, maybe I'm wrong, but my feeling is that Ukrainians in Kiev, they start to realize that the line conducted by Europeans brings them to hell, actually. Because Europeans instigate continued war without having an opportunity and capacity to support, unlike Americans. Americans stopped or reduced supporting, but they at least say you need to stop fighting. Yes. Or they supported before and they supplied. And Europe is that's actually a very provocative and very it's not decent what they do. And again, my feeling is that people in Kyiv start to understand that. That's why they, despite all statements, despite the very bad words about Russia, about negotiations, about boycotting everything, Zelensky said, I will speak only to Putin. If Putin comes, then it will be something. If not, but then they do what actually Russia proposes. And in this regard, coming back to your question, I think Europeans believe they can influence the process by talking, but it's not that easy anymore. It's a different situation now.
Well, because Europeans have created a chattering club, actually, and they always chatter, you know. They chat away all the time, and they expect everyone to respect their chat and act accordingly. They live in the world of their own. There's no question about them, you know. They think they are. It's a very interesting liberal mindset that we all are obliged to pay respect to what they say and what they do and blah blah. Whereas a large part of the world has basically slipped out of their control over the last, particularly few decades. They don't seem to realize that. but they are going to, I think, lose the elections, and we are not going to have to deal with these little childs who go into a shop and want all the toys want to play all the toys at the same time. They won't be around in a few years' time, partially thanks to Russia, defying their chattering and what have you. Now, on the question of NATO guarantees that NATO is not going to be expanding. There's going to be no NATO enlargement anymore. How would you get that guaranteed if the major European countries, are getting in the way all the time? Would, for instance, a US guarantee or some NATO countries' guarantee be enough for Russia? For instance, the United States can say, well, or put it in writing, there's going to be no NATO membership for Ukraine.
Yeah. First of all, I doubt that even this administration will put it in writing. Secondly, even if Trump administration does, okay, next administration will come and will
review the situation,
as Trump did himself with Iran, for example. And the binding statement should be ratified by the US Congress, which is out of question. It's impossible. It's simply impossible. So that's the case. More than that, frankly, Hasan, you are much better than me in theory and practice of international relations, because I'm more in the commentator field.
No.
So you probably
underestimate yourself. No.
No, but I mean that you probably.
Thank you for your praising, but don't underestimate you. Yes.
Well, I mean that you certainly know much more about international law. I'm, as an irresponsible person, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in guarantees at all. There are no such things like guarantees. At least no guarantees which would last for a long time. Russia knows that. Ukraine knows that, by the way. Poland knows that. Everybody, all countries in Europe know that. I think Turkey knows that very well.
Yes.
Yeah. So why I say it? Not because I believe that nothing is possible, but I think at the end of the day, if we arrive to this serious discussion about this, of course, it will be some kind of combination of political statements. I don't believe in legal obligations. Political statements made by probably United States, maybe by Ukraine, less likely by some European countries, which would create not a final rejection of NATO enlargement, but a situation when each side could say, we achieved what we wanted, we don't trust them, they are bastards, but at least we have something. And that's what Putin said many times. He said that we don't trust words, oral commitments which were given to Gorbachev, for example. We don't trust agreements, actually, but at least we need them. That's what he said several times.
Yeah.
And that will be something like this. Practically, the NATO issue is not that severe just now, because we see in case of Moldova, which has been mentioned, Moldova never expressed actually any willingness to join NATO. In Moldovan case, we can expect a different development, that the state will simply disappear. It will become part of another country.
It could, yeah.
Yeah, in Georgian case, Georgia is now enemy of the civilized world. They dared to held elections which were not accepted by Europeans, and now they are bad guys. And in Ukrainian case, I think the whole war, the whole conflict demonstrated then that whatever people say, whatever Mr. Borrell said and others, but no one would risk to go to direct war against Russia. And accepting Ukraine as member of NATO would create a precondition for that. That's why, in practical terms, I don't believe that NATO issue will be on the table. But of course, unfortunately, we have such a huge amount of broken promises from the past that any statements from the Western side will create anger here. And even if Putin accepts, I'm sure that it will be a lot of people who would say that they will that all those statements are senseless. But again, I think that in case we will have some kind of situation where parts are really interested in stopping this, something will be found to formulate.
Well, on the last issue, perhaps it is not a first burner either, but let's suppose that they have reached an agreement, a framework agreement on how the peace formula is going to be achieved, and then it also includes a ceasefire. The Ukrainian side keeps talking about a peacekeeping force, not a peace enforcement force, because in the case of Russia and Ukraine, a peace enforcement force, I can't foresee happening. This is not Bosnia of 1996. You send in a peace enforcement force, but some sort of peacekeeping force. Which countries would Russia basically automatically say, no, you can't basically come in because we don't trust you? I mean, I can imagine Russian side saying, for instance, to the Europeans and in general to all the NATO countries, well, sorry, guys, but you have been a party to the conflict, don't come. Would you say it to Turkey too? And then which countries would you prefer to send in peacekeeping forces, largely?
Yeah, it's I have no idea actually how it can work, frankly. Theoretically, yes, in case of peace agreement, final or preliminary, but some bodies to monitor will be needed. On the European side, of course, we hear all traditional stuff, usual suspects like OSCE, like European Union forces, and so that's out of question. Certainly, Russia will not agree to that. I don't believe that Russia will be very happy to see any outside forces in Ukraine. If it will be inevitable, then most likely not neighbors. And in this regard, Turkey is not the best option from the Russian point of view, even because Turkey certainly has very clear interests in the region. And those peacekeepers or monitors, whatever you say, ideally they should be totally out of context in terms of their own interests there. That's why I think that countries like traditional peacekeepers, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, who else? The African countries, some of them Kenya. I can imagine it will be very strange, of course, to see all those people in Ukraine between. But I don't know. So we are not there yet. So before we will arrive to the situation when we should discuss practical issues, how to sustain peace agreement, many things will happen.
Okay, it's too speculative to talk about. I agree. Yes. Well, Fyodor, thank you very much for joining my program today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have hosted Professor Fyodor Lukyanov today, Valdai Discussion Club's Director of Research and Professor of International Relations at Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Thank you again, Fyodor, and hope to see you again somewhere, either in person or online again, at perhaps at the Valdai Club annual forum. But the problem is we can't see much of you because you moderate President Putin's talk, actually, and we see you just appear together with President Putin at the last moment, and there would be so many people, wanting to exchange some views with you, and then you are overwhelmed by the end of the event for quite understandable reasons. But hope to see you somewhere.
Me too. Okay, thank you very much.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.